Close your eyes and picture Mary Magdalene. The image that probably came to mind is that of a lone woman, covered only by her own hair, weeping at the foot of the cross, or secluded in a cave with a skull in her hands, atoning for a life of sin. That image is in paintings by Titian, by Tintoretto, in hundreds of churches, films, and soap operas. She's the most famous repentant prostitute in history. Except there's a problem: that woman never existed. In none of the four Gospels is Mary Magdalene called a prostitute, a public sinner, or a woman of ill repute. Not once. The real Mary Magdalene of first-century Galilee was someone else entirely, an independent woman of means, who financed Jesus' own movement, and who became the first witness of the resurrection, the single most important event in the entire Christian faith. How was a leader transformed, 1,500 years ago, into the West's greatest symbol of sexual guilt? This is the story of how one woman's memory was rewritten, and of how, 14 centuries later, the Church itself had to correct its own mistake. To understand who this woman really was, we need to separate three layers of texts: the four first-century Gospels, the writings of the early church leaders, and apocryphal texts written much later. Mary Magdalene is named, by name, 12 times in the canonical Gospels, more often than most of the male apostles. The name Magdalene comes from Magdala, a prosperous fishing town in Galilee that exported salted fish as far as Rome. And notice the detail: she isn't identified as anyone's wife, daughter, or sister. She carries the name of her own city, a sign that she was recognized by her own identity and means, not in relation to a man. In the first 2 centuries after Christ, church leaders spoke of her with total respect. Origen defended her in writing against a pagan philosopher who mocked the resurrection by calling her a hysterical woman. Hippolytus of Rome was the first to call the women at the tomb apostles sent to the apostles. Jerome praised her faith as a true watchtower. And Augustine of Hippo, one of the greatest theologians in history, insisted on keeping her separate from any sinner. Only much later, in marginal Gnostic texts from Egypt with no historical value, did she become a character in mystical speculation about secret knowledge, texts modern historiography doesn't consider reliable sources about the real Magdalene. The first time Mary Magdalene appears as her own person is in the Gospel of Luke. The text says Jesus was accompanied not only by the 12 apostles, but by a group of women he had healed, among them, Mary, called Magdalene, from whom 7 demons had gone out. For centuries, that line became proof of a life of sin. But historians explain that, in the 1st century, demonic possession had nothing to do with morality or sexuality. It was how people of that era described illnesses they didn't understand: epilepsy, seizures, severe psychiatric disorders. And the number 7, in Jewish culture, symbolized totality, meaning the text is saying she suffered from a deep, overwhelming affliction, from which she was completely healed. That healing generated absolute loyalty. And that same verse reveals another extraordinary detail: these women provided for them out of their own means. Mary Magdalene wasn't a beggar or just any follower, she was a patron, a woman of means who funded, out of her own pocket, Jesus' itinerant mission through Galilee. In a deeply patriarchal society, the evangelists themselves recorded, without embarrassment, that Jesus' movement depended on a woman's money. While the male apostles fled in fear of arrest, Mary Magdalene stayed. She remained at the cross until the end. She watched where Joseph of Arimathea buried the body. And it was she who, at dawn, while it was still dark, returned to the tomb, and found it empty. She ran to tell Peter and another disciple. They came, saw the empty tomb, and went home, not understanding. But Mary stayed. Weeping, alone, in the garden, she saw a man she thought was the gardener, and he asked her, "Woman, why are you weeping? Who are you looking for?" She still didn't recognize him. Only when he said a single word, "Mary," did she understand who stood before her, and she answered, "Rabboni." Teacher. Jesus then gave her an instruction and a mission that would change history: "Do not hold on to me, for I have not yet ascended to the Father. But go to my brothers and tell them, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God." A woman was the first to see Jesus risen, and the first to receive the order to announce it to the apostles themselves. And that, for historians, is one of the strongest signs that this story is true. In the 1st century, a woman's testimony had no legal standing at all. The Jewish historian Flavius Josephus himself wrote that female testimony shouldn't be admitted in court. If the first Christians were inventing a legend to convince the world, they would never have chosen women as the key witnesses. The fact that all 4 Gospels, written independently of one another, all insist on this embarrassing detail is, for critical historiography, powerful evidence that it actually happened. If Mary Magdalene was never called a sinner in the Gospels, where did this reputation that lasted 1400 years come from? The answer has an exact date, name, and address: September 21st of the year 591, at the Basilica of San Clemente, in Rome, when Pope Gregory the Great delivered Homily 33. In that sermon, Gregory took 3 completely different women from the Bible: an anonymous sinner who weeps at Jesus' feet in Luke 7, Mary Magdalene herself from Luke 8, and Mary of Bethany, sister of Martha and Lazarus, and fused them into a single person. It was he who decreed, "We believe that this woman, whom Luke calls a sinner and whom John calls Mary, is the same Mary from whom Mark says 7 demons were cast out." And what do the 7 demons signify, if not the totality of vices? In a single sentence, the 7 demons, which were probably an illness, became the 7 deadly sins. And the woman who anointed Jesus' feet as a sign of devotion became a repentant ex-prostitute. Why did Gregory do this? Rome, at the end of the 6th century, was living a nightmare: economic collapse, flooding of the Tiber River, bubonic plague killing by the thousands, and Lombard barbarians at the city's gates. Gregory needed a powerful story of sin, guilt, and redemption to console and discipline a terrified population, and Magdalene became that perfect symbol. On top of that, the fusion also quietly solved an uncomfortable problem for the church hierarchy. A woman with direct apostolic authority from Christ instead became a repentant sinner, bowed and dependent on forgiveness. That image dominated sacred art for over 1,000 years, from Titian's paintings to Tintoretto's, and even inspired, in the 18th and 19th centuries, real institutions that locked up fallen women, the so-called Magdalene asylums. Here's the most revealing detail in this whole story: this mistake was exclusively Western. The Orthodox Church, on the other side of the old Roman Empire, never made this confusion. For Eastern Christians, there were always 3 different women, never just one. And instead of a sinner, the East gave Mary Magdalene 2 of the highest titles in Christian tradition: myrrh-bearer, in honor of her courage in going to the tomb at dawn to anoint Christ's body, and equal to the apostles, a very rare title given to those who had a founding role in proclaiming the faith. And the East also preserved quite a legend. It said that Mary Magdalene traveled to Rome to meet personally with Emperor Tiberius Caesar, denouncing the injustice done to Jesus. According to tradition, she held a simple hen's egg before the emperor, and announced, "Christ is risen." Tiberius supposedly mocked her, replying, "That's as impossible as this egg turning red." And, before her faith, the egg is said to have changed color instantly. It's this ancient legend that explains, to this day, why Orthodox Christians dye eggs red at Easter. It took 14 centuries for the Catholic Church to officially correct its own mistake. The first step came in 1969, when Pope Paul VI reformed the liturgical calendar after the Second Vatican Council. The word penitent, which had accompanied Mary Magdalene's name for centuries, was removed. The new rubric stated, unambiguously, that July 22 celebrates only Mary Magdalene, to whom Christ appeared after rising, not Martha's sister, nor the sinful woman. But that correction stayed locked away in clerical documents. It never reached the pulpits, or the popular imagination. The lie stayed alive. The real turning point came on June 3, 2016. At the express request of Pope Francis, the Vatican published a decree elevating Mary Magdalene's memorial to the rank of feast, the same liturgical level as the Apostles, an honor that, until then, only Jesus' own mother had received. Archbishop Arthur Roche explained the reason. It is right that the liturgical celebration of this woman should have the same level of festivity given to the celebration of the Apostles. She is the prima testis, the first witness. And precisely because she was an eyewitness, she was also the first to bear witness before the apostles. 14 centuries after Gregory the Great, the Church itself gave Mary Magdalene back the title the first Christians already used, Apostolorum Apostola, Apostle to the Apostles. The image of the sinner, however, left deep marks, including on the religious geography of Europe. In the 13th century, the French legend of the Golden Legend told that Mary Magdalene, fleeing persecution in Jerusalem, was cast into the sea in a boat with no oar, no sail, and no provisions, and miraculously washed ashore in southern France, near Marseille. There, she supposedly evangelized the region and then withdrew to live 30 years in asceticism in a cave in the mountains of Saint Baume, fed, 7 times a day, by choirs of angels. This legend sparked a real war over relics. In the 11th century, the monastery of Vézelay claimed to hold Magdalene's complete skeleton, becoming the third largest pilgrimage destination in Christendom. But in 1279, Prince Charles II of Anjou announced the discovery of a sarcophagus containing her body in the town of Saint Maximin, at the foot of the Saint Baume mountain, usurping Vézelay's prestige with the Pope's own support. To this day, a human skull is kept there, in a gold reliquary, venerated as the head of the Apostle to the Apostles. And Mary Magdalene's feast day remains marked, year after year, on July 22, a date on which, today, she's increasingly celebrated not as a sinner, but as what she always was, a courageous disciple, financial patron of Christ's mission, and the first messenger of the resurrection. Mary Magdalene's story is, at its core, a story about who holds the power to tell history. For nearly 1,500 years, the decision of a handful of men at the top of a religious hierarchy was enough to erase, distort, and replace the memory of a courageous, independent woman who helped found Christianity, with a fabricated image of sexual guilt and submission. It wasn't a translation accident, it was a political and theological choice, one that served, for centuries, to discipline the body and place of women within the Church itself. But the original texts never disappeared. They were there, in the Gospels, waiting 14 centuries until the very institution that rewrote history found the courage to correct it. And that is Mary Magdalene's final legacy. At the moment when Jesus's movement seemed to have died on the cross, when the men closest to him fled in fear, it was the courageous voice of a woman that sustained the entire future of the Christian faith. She went looking for her master's body, and came back as the first witness of life. But in correcting a medieval myth, modern pop culture created another one, just as unfounded. In 2003, the novel The Da Vinci Code, by Dan Brown, popularized the theory that Jesus and Mary Magdalene were married, and that she carried a secret child who founded a royal bloodline in France. The basis of this theory is a decontextualized reading of the Gospel of Philip, a Gnostic text from the 2nd or 3rd century, which calls Magdalene the companion of Jesus and says he used to kiss her. Except, in these Gnostic texts, a kiss and a companion were symbols of the transmission of spiritual knowledge, not signs of marriage or romance. And the theory that the Holy Grail was actually Mary Magdalene's womb, the pun, sang real, royal blood, is a late linguistic invention, impossible in the French of the era when these legends emerged, in the 12th century. No real historical document has ever linked Magdalene to secret marriages or royal bloodlines. The truth about Mary Magdalene doesn't need romance novels or scandals to be extraordinary. She was, provably, an independent disciple, a financial backer of Jesus's movement, and the first witness of the resurrection, titles no myth can top. If this story made you see Mary Magdalene differently, leave a like here and comment on what surprised you most. That helps this video reach more people, and it's also a way of evangelizing. Share it with someone who only knows the wrong version of this story. And follow this channel, because this is the first in a new series of videos investigating the real history behind the great saints of the Church.